Good evening. Welcome to my channel. I have something a little bit different for you today. Since I've had quite a few short stories published since I started writing them again, I think I've had 23 published so far and there's another 4 pending. I thought I'd sort of take stock and look at all the things that have been published and try and do some sort of analysis to see whether there's any lessons I can draw from what's proven popular with editors. Because I've probably made over 600 applications. So I'm achieving about 4% success rate, which might not sound much, but given the odds that are stacked against any submission, maybe 1 in 200 or 300, that's still doing pretty well, really. So I wanted to figure out what stories are working, what kind of themes are working, what sort of length, what genre, and see if I can draw any conclusions from that about what I should be doing in the future, and in fact maybe about what is generally popular with magazine editors. And that's why I've got the daft clickbaity title. I wouldn't say I've found the formula for everyone, but I seem to have found the formula for me at least. So anyway, let's dig in and see what the score is. So I mean, I've had a whole bunch of stories published, mostly on, either online or in magazines, and these are some of the magazines. So they range from sort of very fancy, this is a brand new one, very lovely glossy art-based magazine, Kythe, which published my piece Wheatfield with Crows about Vincent van Gogh, and everything. I mean, this is a magazine, volume 56, been going for a long time, out of Arapahoe College in, where is that? Somewhere in America. Arapahoe, Colorado, there you go, Colorado. In fact, many of my publications have been published, things have been published overseas. There are just a lot more magazines, basically. That's the Freshwater Review, rather nice, lovely literary magazine there. Anyway, it's nice to see your work in print, and so we should do everything we can to as artists, to generate the kind of work that editors like. So I've had a look at my stories. I did a little analysis here, just on a notebook, and I've come up with some recurring themes and recurring lessons, which is interesting. I didn't think that there'd be anything to link them, but there is. First lesson I've learned is to keep it short, because basically, apart from 4 long stories, everything else is either microfiction, which I would say 100 or 200 words, flash fiction up to 1,000, or a very short experimental piece or poem. Obviously, this means that magazine editors can publish a lot more work in their journals. So though some of them will say we accept work up to 6,000 words, if it's going to be 6,000 words, it has to be amazing, because they're going to devote a large chunk of their magazine, especially if it's print, to your work. It's perhaps easier online because it's just a few more pages to scroll. But certainly with the online publications, less is definitely more. And all my flash stuff that I've written generally is about 1,000 words. I mean, usually the cutoff's about 1,000 words. Actually, some of them, I suppose, they might have started off as flash, and then maybe when I did an edit and submitted, it was about 1,100, 1,200. But I would still call that flash fiction. Really, it's not a lengthy piece. And then, when it comes to genre, literary fiction, unsurprisingly, literary fiction is the most popular. I would say, let me just have a look. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. 13, but that's out of 23. So that leaves 10 which aren't literary fiction that were published. And most of those were science fiction. And not necessarily published in science fiction magazines. This is the interesting thing. And I'll tell you why when I come to the theme section. But also, there are 2 ghost stories that were published, 2 fairly sort of classic style ghost stories. So they're actually more popular than you might think. And one very short piece of fantasy. So don't be afraid of writing in genres other than literary fiction. And then I did a little, it's not scientific, but I did a kind of theme analysis. So I wrote down some of the main themes of each story, and then I tried to draw connections. So there are minor themes in my work that has been published, which have sort of popped up. Selfishness, characters who start off selfish and then kind of learn a lesson. I guess that appeals to people's sense of justice. Technology, obviously in the science fiction stories it makes sense, but also in some of the other stories I'm talking about the effects of technology. There was one piece called The End of Money that was a sort of satire on what would happen if we tried to give up on money altogether. That was popular. Actually got published twice, that one, which is a rarity. Escape is a very popular theme. People, getting out of a terrible situation, struggling, striving. Usually it involves some action. There's a lot of forward motion, so that is popular. Love, inevitably, is popular. I had 6 stories published with that as a theme or sub-theme. But when we get to the big three themes, rebirth and redemption, I'm counting them as one. 7 stories out of 23, so almost a third, feature some form of rebirth or redemption. The second most popular, it's not really a theme, it's more of a mode, but it doesn't really fit in, it's a subgenre or mode, and that is dystopia. So even beyond the stories that I would call pure science fiction, there were things that were, dystopian in nature. So a couple of the experimental pieces had that as a sort of mode of writing. And that would also extend into, I've got a piece coming up which is a sort of dystopia and experimental, so that would add to the number. Dystopia, and maybe it's the time we're living in at the moment, but dystopian fiction is popular. But the big one, the absolutely big one, and I've admitted that I've lumped a few things together in this category, is what I would call death, aging, grief and loss, or DAGS for short. Or, no, not DAGS, DAGGLE. Death, aging, grief, loss. GLAD. Interesting. Let's use the word GLAD. Grief, loss, aging and death. GLAD. Very popular. 10 out of the 23 stories have that, some form of that. And I think it's fair to lump them all together because they are all part of the same thing. The aging process, ending in death, or a sense of loss for something that's gone, someone else who's died, something that's gone from your childhood, or grief. That very poignant feeling is number one. If you can get that into your story, you'll be doing well. So, and actually when I add the 4 stories that haven't yet been published but are scheduled to be published, I've got Merry-Go-Round, that's a romantic story about love and rebirth in the sense of new hope. We Wove the World Wide Web, that's a kind of experimental, it's not really dystopia. Technology definitely features in that. It's only 42 words long though, so it's not really a major contender for statistical relevance. After Language is experimental, but it's definitely a dystopia. And The Tooth is historical literary fiction, definitely about loss. It's set in Ukraine at the beginning of the conflict, so loss, death, grief, obviously heavily important to that. So there you go, not bucking the trend with the yet to be published work. So the magic formula for your short story, if you want the best chance of getting published according to these statistics, and of course it might just be that I'm good at writing these things, that if I try to write other things it won't be as good. But anyway, let's pretend it's universal for a minute. If it's universal, the best thing to do is to write a piece of literary fiction with a hint of science fiction, 1,000 words long, on the subject of death and redemption in a dystopian future. And there you are. That is the perfect formula for a winning short story, according to me. And I will be back with one that may or may not have some of these themes in it. It's quite likely to, let's be honest. I'll be back very soon. Bye.